The president saying this will be ended soon, quote, very soon. What do you believe very soon is?
Well, if you listen to all the other qualifications, I don't know what he's going to do. I guess there are several possibilities. One, maybe it will end very soon. Number two, what he's doing is market manipulation. He wants to get the price of oil down, and he wants to get the stock markets up. So when he first made that comment, or when that comment was first reported some hours ago, the markets reacted incredibly swiftly, as he would have liked.
Do you think that's what this was about? I'm sorry, do you think that's what this was about today? Because as you pointed out, once the president made those comments in a separate interview, gas prices, or the crude oil futures prices, plunged. And so it begs the question how much longer this president wants to be in this war, given the military successes.
Right. Well, I think everybody knows that he did nearly a 180 on his tariffs back in April of last year, when the bond market in particular started to go crazy. It's the conventional wisdom in Washington that he watches the market, and the markets were reacting in a way that was obviously very unfavorable to him. The one thing that he harps on time and time again is the price of gasoline at the pump, and the price of gasoline at the pump was going north at a fairly rapid rate. The third possibility, though, is that he's getting ready to walk away with this. He will declare total victory. He's essentially declared victory is at 99% right now, so it won't take much more to declare total victory. Regardless of what's happening in Iran, he'll declare it, and we'll let go at that point. So, in short, the choices are pretty much any choice you want.
Speaking of choices, this stood out to me, which was early on in the press conference there with the president and reporters down in South Florida. After the president was talking about all of the military successes, saying we've made major strides to completing our military objective, described their capability missile-wise, Iran's, down to 10%. He then suggested that the U.S., if we want, could go further, potentially to Iran's electrical grid. Here's what the president said, and then we'll pick it up.
We've left some of the most important targets for later in case we need to do it. If we hit them, it's going to take many years for them to be rebuilt, having to do with electricity production and many other things. So we're not looking to do that if we don't have to. But they're the kind of things that are very easy to hit, but very devastating if they are hit. We are waiting to see what happens before we hit them. We could take them all out in one day.
How big of a possibility is that potentially? It seems like the president didn't want to go there just yet, but put it on the table.
Right. Well, I think that's pretty clear that we could go after their infrastructure as the Russians are going after Ukraine's infrastructure. We could go after their oil infrastructure to make it impossible for them to export oil. So if the current government survives, it would have no source of revenue. There are plenty of targets we haven't hit yet. We and the Israelis have been going after leadership and targets in the Revolutionary Guard and other elements of the military, which I think is the right approach up until now. It really means, though, that the timing of the end here is totally Trump's. And there's nothing he said in this press conference today that gives me any certainty what that point is.
The Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who is now been appointed as the new supreme leader. The president was asked about this a couple different ways. He was asked whether or not he should take him out and whether or not he has a target on his back. And both times, Ambassador, he said, well, I don't want to say that. What do you think he should do on that front?
Well, I think you know, in a lot of the questions in this press conference, he could have said no comment. That's what normal presidents do, and just end the speculation right there, not give people anything in addition to speculate about. Obviously, he said we've wiped out their leadership 1, 2, and 3 tiers down, which isn't true, but he said it. And the Ayatollah Khamenei, the son, Mojtaba, is obviously back at tier 1 of the leadership. So if he's trumpeting the destruction of much of the previous leadership, it sort of follows from that this leadership's got to go too.
You think he ends up striking? You think he ends up taking him out, the son?
Well, either the U.S. or Israel. This guy is not going to negotiate. He's not going to be Delcy Rodriguez, and as in Venezuela. And by the way, Venezuela is unlikely to work as Trump thinks. Besides that, certainly not going to happen in Iran.
The Strait of Hormuz has obviously been a big focus and a big topic because 20% of the world's oil goes through the strait. And as we've seen over the last few days here, oil prices are up to basically, or gas prices at the pump for regular unleaded, basically at $3.50 nationwide on average. And the president over the weekend said, he said, quote, "These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts. There's nothing to be afraid of." And today in this press conference, he talked about how the U.S. Navy will need to escort tankers if needed. Should ships, from your view, be going through the Strait of Hormuz at this point, or are we not at that point yet to where they feel that they can be completely safe?
Well, I don't think we can say that for now, that's for sure. I mean, let's be clear what we're talking about. We know that China has sold Iran anti-ship missiles in the past, and it was widely reported in the press just days before Trump ordered the strikes that China had signed another contract with Iran to deliver anti-ship missiles. So that's one threat. The other threat is mining in the Strait of Hormuz, which is very narrow in its key passageway. But just imagine a tanker sailing down the Persian Gulf headed toward the strait, and it gets hit by one or two anti-ship missiles and explodes and sinks, burns and sinks right there in the middle of the Persian Gulf.
Trump said that would...
one more...
Yeah, Trump said that would be the end of the country.
Well, yeah, he said that would be the end of the country before he started this, too. I mean, the threat, the fact is that if you sank one or two tankers, if the Iranians did, nobody would move anything in the Strait of Hormuz for the foreseeable future. And since the president is variable in his definition of what success is here in strike number one, actually I should say strike number two. Remember the 12-day war where our participation was 1 day. So now it's been about 9 days. You know, at some point you make these threats and people simply are not intimidated by them anymore. I would say, therefore, the prudent course is continue our operation and work to change the regime, not to think that some unknown ayatollah is going to renounce not just 47 years of rule of the country, but 1,000 years of this philosophy and say, actually, we were wrong all along. You're going to get negotiation with Iranians when this regime departs.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.